If you're watching this right now, I want you to do something for me. Look around the room you're in. Notice the shadows, the corners, the places your eyes don't usually linger. Now ask yourself, how much do you really know about the space you call home? How much do you trust your own senses? Tonight I'm going to share with you true haunting stories that will make you question reality itself. These aren't just tales of things that go bump in the night. These are stories that blur the line between what's real and what's impossible. Stories that have left even the most skeptical people doubting everything they thought they knew. Let's start with a story that comes from a small, unremarkable town in the Midwest. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and nothing ever seems to happen until it does. This story was sent in by a man named Eric, who, until a few years ago, would have laughed at the idea of ghosts or hauntings. He was a practical guy, a mechanic by trade, the sort of person who believed every problem had a logical solution. But what happened to him one winter night changed his mind forever. Eric had just finished a long shift at the garage. It was late and the roads were slick with ice. He drove home carefully, headlights cutting through the darkness, the world outside his windshield silent and still. When he pulled into his driveway, he noticed something odd. The porch light was off. He always left it on for himself, a small comfort against the cold. But tonight it was dark. He shrugged it off, thinking maybe the bulb had finally burned out. Inside, the house was colder than usual. He could see his breath in the air as he walked through the hallway, his boots echoing on the hardwood floor. He flipped the light switch, but nothing happened. The power must have gone out, he thought, though the street lights outside were still glowing. He moved through the house by the light of his phone, checking the fuse box, but everything seemed normal. That's when he heard it. A soft, rhythmic tapping coming from upstairs. At first, Eric thought it was just the house settling, or maybe a branch scraping against the window. But the sound was too regular, too deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. He called out, half joking, "If someone's up there, you picked the wrong house." No answer. He climbed the stairs, each step creaking under his weight, the tapping growing louder as he approached the master bedroom. The door was closed, but he could see a faint light flickering underneath. He hesitated, heart pounding, then pushed the door open. The room was empty, but the tapping continued, now coming from the closet. Eric crossed the room, every instinct telling him to turn back, but he couldn't stop himself. He opened the closet door. Inside, there was nothing but his old winter coats and a few boxes. The tapping stopped. He let out a shaky laugh, feeling foolish, and turned to leave. That's when he saw it. A handprint smeared in condensation on the inside of the closet door. It was small, like a child's, but Eric lived alone. He stared at it, trying to convince himself it was just a trick of the light, maybe something he'd never noticed before. But as he watched, another handprint appeared right next to the first, as if an invisible child was pressing their hands against the wood. Eric stumbled back, slamming the closet door shut. The tapping started again, louder this time, more insistent. He ran downstairs, grabbed his keys, and left the house without looking back. He spent the night in his car, engine running, watching the house from the safety of the street. In the morning, when he finally worked up the courage to go back inside, the handprints were gone. The power was back on, the house was warm, and everything seemed normal. But Eric never forgot that night. He moved out a few months later, unable to shake the feeling that something was still waiting for him in that closet. Now, maybe you're thinking there's a rational explanation. Maybe the handprints were just old marks he'd never noticed. Or maybe the cold and the darkness played tricks on his mind. But Eric swears what he saw was real, and he's not the only one. Stories like his come from all over the world. Ordinary people living ordinary lives, until something happens that makes them question everything. The next story comes from a woman named Priya, who grew up in a bustling city in India. Her family lived in a cramped apartment on the top floor of an old building, the kind with peeling paint and narrow staircases that always seemed to creak underfoot. Priya was a skeptic, raised in a family that didn't believe in ghosts or superstitions. But one summer when she was 16, something happened that she still can't explain. It started with the dreams. Every night, Priya would wake up at exactly 3:07 a.m., heart racing, drenched in sweat. She couldn't remember what she'd been dreaming about, only that it left her feeling terrified and alone. At first, she thought it was just stress from her upcoming exams. But the dreams kept coming night after night, always at the same time. One night, after waking from another nightmare, Priya decided to get a glass of water. She crept through the dark apartment, careful not to wake her parents. As she passed the living room, she saw something that made her stop in her tracks. There, standing by the window, was a woman she didn't recognize. The woman was dressed in a faded red sari, her hair long and tangled. Her face turned away from Priya. For a moment, Priya thought it was her mother. But something about the woman's posture, the way she stood so still, made her skin crawl. Priya called out, "Ma!" The woman didn't move. Priya took a step closer, and the woman slowly turned to face her. Her eyes were empty, hollow, as if she were looking straight through Priya. The room grew cold, the air thick with the scent of jasmine and something else, something rotten. Priya stumbled back, her heart pounding, and the woman vanished, leaving only the faintest trace of her perfume behind. Priya didn't sleep for the rest of the night. She sat on her bed, knees pulled to her chest, listening for any sound that might signal the woman's return. When the sun finally rose, she tried to convince herself it had all been a dream, a trick of her tired mind. But the scent of jasmine still lingered in the living room, and when she asked her mother if she'd been up during the night, her mother shook her head and said she hadn't left her room. The days that followed were filled with a strange tension. Priya's dreams grew more vivid, more disturbing. She saw the woman in red standing at the foot of her bed, whispering words she couldn't understand. Sometimes Priya would wake to find her bedroom window open, even though she was sure she'd closed it before going to sleep. Her grades began to slip and her parents grew worried, but Priya couldn't bring herself to tell them what was happening. She was afraid they'd think she was losing her mind. One evening, as the family sat down for dinner, Priya's younger brother mentioned seeing a woman in the hallway the night before. He described her exactly as Priya had seen her: the red sari, the long hair, the empty eyes. Their parents exchanged uneasy glances, but brushed it off as a child's imagination. Priya knew better. She wasn't alone in this. Desperate for answers, Priya began researching the history of their building. She discovered that decades earlier, a woman had died in their apartment under mysterious circumstances. The story was vague, but neighbors whispered about a young bride who had been found by the window, her sari stained with blood, her eyes wide open in terror. The details matched the woman in Priya's dreams. That night, Priya decided to confront whatever was haunting her. She set an alarm for 3 a.m. and waited, heart pounding as the minutes ticked by. At exactly 3:07, the room grew cold, and the scent of jasmine filled the air. Priya sat up, clutching a small silver locket her grandmother had given her for protection. The woman appeared at the foot of her bed, just as she had in the dreams. This time, Priya didn't look away. She forced herself to meet the woman's gaze, to hold it, even as fear threatened to overwhelm her. The woman's lips moved, forming words Priya couldn't hear. Priya whispered, "What do you want?" The woman's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, Priya felt a wave of sadness so intense it nearly knocked the breath from her lungs. Then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, the woman vanished. The next morning, Priya found the locket open on her pillow, a single tear-shaped drop of water inside. She never saw the woman again, but the experience left her changed. She still doesn't know what the woman wanted, or why she chose Priya. But she's certain of one thing: some things can't be explained. No matter how hard we try, if you're starting to feel uneasy, you're not alone. These stories have a way of getting under your skin, making you question what's real and what's not. But the next story might be the most unsettling of all, because it happened in broad daylight, in a place where you'd least expect it, a busy city park. This story comes from a man named David, who was out for a jog one afternoon in late spring. The park was crowded with families, kids playing on the swings, couples walking hand in hand. It was the kind of day that makes you feel safe, surrounded by people and sunlight. But as David rounded a bend in the path, he noticed a woman sitting alone on a bench, her back to him. She was dressed in old-fashioned clothes, a long skirt and a high-collared blouse, her hair pulled back in a tight bun. At first, David didn't think much of it, but as he passed by, he glanced at her face and felt a jolt of fear. Her eyes were wide and unblinking, her skin pale as paper. She didn't move, didn't even seem to breathe. David slowed down, uneasy, and looked around to see if anyone else had noticed her. But the other park-goers walked by without a second glance, as if she wasn't there at all. Curiosity got the better of him, and David circled back, pretending to tie his shoe near the bench. He watched the woman out of the corner of his eye, waiting for her to move. She didn't. Finally, he worked up the nerve to speak. "Excuse me, are you okay?" he asked. The woman didn't respond. David reached out, intending to tap her on the shoulder, but as his hand drew near, she turned to look at him. Her eyes were completely black, with no whites or irises, just endless darkness. David stumbled back, heart racing, and the woman smiled. A slow, unnatural smile that seemed to stretch too wide for her face. He blinked, and in that instant she was gone. The bench was empty, as if she'd never been there at all. Shaken, David left the park and tried to put the encounter out of his mind. But that night, as he lay in bed, he heard a soft whispering in his ear, a voice he recognized as the woman's. "You saw me," she said. "Now I see you." For weeks afterward, David caught glimpses of her in mirrors, in windows, always just out of the corner of his eye. He moved to a new city, changed his routine, but sometimes late at night he still hears her voice, reminding him that some things once seen can never be unseen. It's easy to dismiss these stories as tricks of the mind, as dreams or hallucinations. But what if they're not? What if the world is stranger than we think, and reality is just a thin veil over something much darker, much older, and much more mysterious than we can imagine? If you're still with me, you might be feeling a chill in the air, or maybe you've started glancing over your shoulder, just to make sure you're really alone. That's the thing about true haunting stories. They don't just scare you, they linger, making you question the ordinary moments of your own life. The next story comes from a place you might not expect. A brand new apartment building. The kind with modern amenities, bright lights, and security cameras everywhere. But as you'll see, even the most carefully constructed walls can't keep out what doesn't belong. This story was sent in by a woman named Julia, who had just moved into her first apartment after college. She was excited to start her new life, to decorate her own space, to finally have a place to call her own. The building was sleek and modern, with a doorman and a rooftop garden. Julia felt safe there, surrounded by neighbors and the constant hum of city life. But almost immediately, strange things began to happen. It started with small things, lights flickering for no reason, her phone charger going missing, the faint sound of footsteps in the hallway late at night. Julia brushed it off as the quirks of a new building, or maybe just her imagination. But then, one night, she woke to the sound of someone whispering her name. At first she thought it was a dream, but the voice was so clear, so close that she sat up in bed, heart pounding. The room was empty, the door locked, but the whispering continued, growing louder, more insistent. Julia tried to ignore it, but the whispers followed her throughout the apartment. She'd hear them in the shower, in the kitchen, even as she walked down the hallway to the elevator. Sometimes she'd catch a glimpse of movement in the corner of her eye, a shadow darting across the wall, a figure standing just out of sight. She started sleeping with the lights on, but it didn't help. The feeling of being watched grew stronger every day. One evening, Julia invited a friend over for dinner, hoping that company would chase away the unease. As they sat in the living room, laughing and sharing stories, Julia's friend suddenly went quiet, her eyes fixed on the hallway. "Did you see that?" she whispered. Julia shook her head, but her friend insisted she'd seen someone standing just outside the bedroom door. A tall, thin figure, watching them with empty eyes. Julia's friend left soon after, clearly shaken. That night, Julia dreamed of the figure her friend had described. In the dream, it stood at the foot of her bed, its face a blur, its hands reaching out for her. She woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, the feeling of cold fingers still lingering on her skin. Desperate for answers, Julia set up her phone to record video while she slept. The next morning, she watched the footage, expecting to see nothing but darkness. But at exactly 3:14 a.m., the camera picked up a faint, shadowy figure moving across the room. It paused at the foot of her bed, then vanished into the wall. Julia replayed the video over and over, trying to convince herself it was just a trick of the light. But the figure was unmistakable. She showed the video to the building manager, who watched in silence before finally admitting that Julia wasn't the first tenant to report strange occurrences in that apartment. The previous tenant had moved out suddenly, leaving most of their belongings behind. No one knew why, but the rumors spread quickly. The apartment was haunted. Julia moved out a week later, unable to shake the feeling that something was following her. She still has the video, but she refuses to watch it. She says that sometimes late at night she hears the whispers again, no matter where she is. It's as if the haunting didn't stay behind in the apartment, but attached itself to her. A shadow she can never quite escape. If you're starting to wonder if these stories could happen to you, you're not alone. The next story comes from a man named Marcus, who grew up in a small town surrounded by dense woods. He was an outdoorsman, comfortable in the wild, unafraid of the dark. But one night, while camping alone deep in the forest, he encountered something that made him question everything he thought he knew about the world. Marcus had set up camp by a quiet lake, miles from the nearest road. The night was clear, the stars bright overhead, and the only sounds were the gentle lapping of water and the distant call of an owl. He built a fire, cooked his dinner, and settled in for the night, feeling at peace. But as he lay in his tent, drifting off to sleep, he heard footsteps outside, slow, deliberate, crunching through the underbrush. At first, Marcus thought it was a deer or maybe a raccoon, but the footsteps were too heavy, too purposeful. He sat up listening, his heart pounding. The footsteps circled the tent, stopping just outside the entrance. Marcus held his breath, waiting, but whoever or whatever was out there didn't move. Minutes passed, then an hour, the footsteps never straying far. Finally, Marcus worked up the courage to unzip the tent and look outside. The fire had burned down to embers, casting long shadows across the campsite. At the edge of the light, he saw a figure standing perfectly still, watching him. It was tall and thin, its features obscured by darkness, but Marcus could feel its eyes on him, cold and unblinking. He called out, "Who's there?" But the figure didn't respond. Instead, it slowly raised one arm and pointed directly at Marcus. A wave of terror washed over him, primal and overwhelming. He scrambled back into the tent, zipped it shut, and waited, clutching his flashlight like a weapon. The footsteps resumed, circling the tent again and again, until finally, just before dawn, they faded away. When Marcus emerged from the tent, the figure was gone. But in the soft earth around the campsite, he found a series of footprints, long, narrow, and unlike anything he'd ever seen. He packed up and left the woods that morning, vowing never to camp alone again. To this day, he can't explain what he saw, but he knows it was real. And sometimes when he's alone in the dark, he still feels those cold eyes watching him. There's a moment, after you've heard enough of these stories, when you start to wonder if the world is really as solid as it seems. Maybe you've felt it before, a sudden chill, a shadow that moves just a little too quickly, a whisper in an empty room. Maybe you've brushed it off, told yourself it was nothing. But what if it wasn't? What if, just for a moment, you caught a glimpse of something beyond the ordinary, something that doesn't fit into the neat boxes we use to make sense of our lives? The last story I want to share tonight comes from a woman named Evelyn, who spent her childhood in a sprawling Victorian house on the outskirts of a quiet town. The house was beautiful but old, with creaking floors, stained glass windows, and a grand staircase that seemed to groan with every step. Evelyn's parents loved the house for its history and charm, but for Evelyn, it was a place of secrets. From the time she was little, Evelyn would see things out of the corner of her eye, shapes moving in the mirrors, faces peering from behind doors. Her parents always told her it was just her imagination, but the feeling of being watched never left her. At night, she'd hear footsteps in the hallway, soft and slow, stopping just outside her bedroom door. Sometimes she'd wake to find her toys arranged in strange patterns on the floor, or her closet door standing open when she was sure she'd closed it. One winter, when Evelyn was 12, her parents decided to renovate the house. As workers tore up the old floorboards in the attic, they discovered a small, locked box hidden between the beams. Inside were faded photographs, a child's silver bracelet, and a diary written in a shaky hand. The diary belonged to a girl named Lila, who had lived in the house nearly a century earlier. As Evelyn read the diary, she learned that Lila had been lonely, often left alone in the big house while her parents traveled. The entries grew darker as the pages went on, filled with talk of shadows and voices that whispered to her at night. After the box was found, the strange occurrences in the house intensified. Doors slammed on their own, lights flickered, and cold spots appeared in the middle of rooms. One night, Evelyn woke to find a girl standing at the foot of her bed, her hair in braids, her eyes wide and sad. The girl didn't speak, but Evelyn knew somehow that it was Lila. She watched as the girl pointed to the diary on Evelyn's nightstand, then faded away. Evelyn's parents finally believed her after they saw the girl themselves, standing at the top of the stairs, her form shimmering in the moonlight. They brought in a local historian, who confirmed that Lila had died in the house under mysterious circumstances. After a small memorial was held in her honor, the haunting stopped. But Evelyn never forgot the feeling of being watched, or the sadness in Lila's eyes. These stories aren't just about ghosts or haunted houses. They're about the thin places in our world, the moments when reality slips and something else comes through. They remind us that we don't know everything, that there are mysteries we can't explain, and that sometimes the past refuses to stay buried. So the next time you hear a strange noise in the night, or catch a glimpse of something in the corner of your eye, remember these stories. Remember that reality isn't always as solid as it seems. And remember, sometimes the scariest thing isn't what's out there in the dark. It's the possibility that the world is far stranger than we could ever imagine.